Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations,
foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
My name is Leah Verier-Dunn, and I'm a consultant with the Patterson Foundation and your host today as we dive into the disaster space through the unique perspective of Craig Fugate, who served as President Barack Obama's FEMA administrator from May 2009 to January 2017, Florida Governor Jeb Bush's emergency management director from 2001 to 2007, and Governor Charlie Crist's from 2007 to 2009. He's led FEMA through multiple record-breaking disaster years and oversaw the federal government's response to several major events. Additionally, he's worked as a volunteer and at the local level for emergency management. As you can see, he comes with no shortage of substance, and we're so happy to have him on the podcast today. Craig, welcome to the Rising Resilience podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of hearing you speak as our keynote speaker yesterday at our inaugural CERT Summit. And you have so much to share, so I want to dive right in. I touched a little bit on your background already, but my few words certainly don't do your history justice. So I'm hoping you can share a little bit about yourself and your history in this, the work in this area.
Well, I grew up in North Florida, so I grew up in a little town north of Gainesville called Alachua, where when I got out of high school, I had joined the local volunteer fire department. Okay, got my minimum standards at Florida State Fire College, and ultimately had moved up with Alachua County to become a lieutenant with fire rescue. And that I thought was my career path. And then I got a call right after I got promoted to lieutenant that they wanted me to come downtown to the administration building and work for 2 weeks. And there were several projects, and one of them which was updating the county's disaster plan. And I remember that date because it was in February of 1987. And that's really when I made the switch from thinking my career was going to be as a fire officer, paramedic, to emergency management. And that 2 weeks stretched into over 10 years at the county level. And that's where, when people say, everything about FEMA and about the state, I'm like, well, a lot of what I learned was really working at the county level and working with a lot of different organizations.
Yeah, is that a typical trajectory to go from, working in fire and in those local small spaces to getting all the way to emergency management, or is that unique?
I don't know if it's so much unique. I think, when I was getting into it, we were really transitioning from the era of civil defense to this new term, emergency management. This idea that disasters were cyclic, and it was, all hazards, not just, every threat you plan for. And at that time, you had a lot of retired military people, a lot of the folks that had come into the program that came from planning backgrounds, that came from public safety backgrounds. There wasn't really a formal degree program. Today, you find a lot of people, they actually want to do this, go to college, get their degrees in it, and start out their careers. Others hit that point where they are finishing up their career as responders in public safety, yet they're looking for something else. And you'll see a lot of those folks then move into the emergency management space. So it's never been what I call a traditional path, although you're seeing more formal education and people starting out with this as their career.
Interesting. Okay. So as you've mentioned, you've worked in all of these different capacities. Talk to us about the disaster ecosystem and what it looks like. Who are all of the players and how do they intertwine together?
Well, when you watch the news, everybody thinks it's all about FEMA. And so having worked at FEMA and worked at a level, I have to keep reminding everybody, it's really at the local level. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, disasters are going to be a local response supported by and managed by the governor and their team, with FEMA supporting the governor. It is not about the each level up coming in and running everything. And so the first thing is what I call the government-centric approach is it's local, then state, and then if required, federal. And that was the system, essentially, we responded with the 2004 hurricanes. We had learned to work better with our volunteer organizations. This came out of Hurricane Andrew. So we had very strong relationships with a lot of our established volunteer organizations, Red Cross, Salvation Army, Southern Baptist, Catholic Charities. At that point, things like Team Rubicon and the Cajun Navy didn't even exist. Um, and so you had a fairly well-developed volunteer system, which in Florida were one of our primary ways that we shelter people, but also we fed people after disasters. Um, and that was it. And by the time we got to 2005, we started realizing that we were leaving out the private sector. We had worked with utilities, we understood that, but the thing that we were doing was in 2004, we basically assumed if the power was out, all the big boxes were closed, particularly retail food. And so we would attempt to get food, water, other supplies into areas. And we weren't really working with the private sector. And by 2005, Governor Bush sometimes can be very ironic in his observations. He calls me up, he's down in Miami. He said, "Hey, Craig, I want to let you know I'm down at one of our points of distribution of pods where we hand out the water and ice and food and all that stuff." So it seems to be going well. People are in line. It's moving. The National Guard here. It looks great. Okay, good field report. Then he adds, and they're eating fast food and they have groceries from the local grocery store. That's all he said. And I'm like, well, if they're getting fast food and the grocery store is open, why are we there? And it turned out the difference between 2004 and 2005, I give a lot of credit, Publix and these other chains, particularly Publix, they were accelerating getting stores open faster than we realized, because the lesson they learned in 2004 is you don't want to be the only store closed if your competitor gets open. And so they began really putting in generators, getting in supplies. They come up with a whole list of how to restock a store if it's, if they lost power and everything, they got to throw out, how to get back up. And in Wilma, where we had power outages from basically the Florida Keys all the way up to Treasure Coast, across Lake Okeechobee and down in the Southwest Florida, turned out, especially in the hard-hit counties on the East Coast, there's only 5 of the big boxes closed because of the power outage. Everybody else was open on generators. And the problem that we found was we were basing our decision where to hand out supplies, where was the greatest population, 2, where was the best road access, and 3, where were large spaces that we could set up and run this. Because it take a lot of space. Yeah. Turned out that's the same places they put in grocery stores. That's what they do. And so we were actually open and operating and handing out free supplies in the parking lots of open grocery stores, which didn't make sense. And it really highlighted something, that if we had been working better with the big chains and knowing where they could get open, we should have been in places like Pahokee. Because once you got into Belglades and Pahokee and around the lake, there was nothing open, and they had IGAs which were not open. And they were literally having to drive from around the lake all the way into West Palm Beach to get supplies, when also, if you remember, Wilma, the gas supplies were so limited. And we found ourselves competing with private sector. Governor Bush says we got to do better. So I said, is the mission here to get supplies in an area or get free supplies into the area? And he said, no, it's just get supplies in the area. I said, then we need to work with our private sector. And we initially we wanted them to do all this logistic stuff, and they came back with, well, it's going to cost a lot of money because we don't have idle capacity. And I figured out we had to ask a different question. What can we do to get you open? They said, get the roads open and provide security. And I said, well, if that's what you need, and we know you're open, then we're going to focus where you're not open or where people can't get to you. And so that was the third thing. So I thought, okay, we got it now. We've got government, we got the volunteers, now we got the private sector. Everything is working. And then Katrina kind of exposed the catastrophic disaster. So we started doing catastrophic disaster planning. FEMA was providing grant dollars. And so it was like after Katrina, it was 2006, we were doing this catastrophic planning. And I got to pick the scenario. So I said, well, let's do the Great Miami Hurricane, because we have a lot of data on it and we'll apply it to today's populations, demographics, stuff. Well, that's like $130 to $150 billion storm. It knocks out everything from Miami all the way to south, right through Sarasota. It exited just south of Tampa Bay as a major hurricane and then hits Pensacola. And in that response, we had all of these I mean, we had representatives from Walmart down there, Publix was there. We had all of the volunteer organizations. We had all of our federal partners. We had Department of Defense. And when we looked at the numbers and the planning, we didn't have enough. We couldn't get there fast enough. I mean, Florida's a peninsula. There's limited ways to get down.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept talking about the victims. And I kept thinking about this. I'm like, okay, there's over 6 million people just on the East Coast. And I'm thinking, okay, if there's nothing left, what are they doing? And the approach was, well, they're the victims. We got to go take care of them. I'm like, well, they're not waiting on you. Why are we calling them victims? Why are we not looking at them as part of the response? Well, they're not trained. They don't know what to do. They'll panic. And I'm like, we have nothing left. We cannot get there fast enough. There's not enough resources. What's left? It's the public.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really when I started to make the switch that we've got to get out of this mindset that the public is a liability. And I'm like, no, they're a resource. And that was really this idea that I learned by the time I got to FEMA, I took with me was when you talk about, we use the term whole of government, but it's really just get out of this government centric and realize that the government, the traditional voluntary organizations active in disasters, we call those VOADs, are business partners, both those providing critical infrastructure, but those providing goods and services, and the public were all part of that team. And that's a philosophy that really came out of observations from my days as a paramedic in the county to the state, and I took with it when I went to FEMA.
That it's so interesting to hear about all of the layers because, as you said, very often we're kind of focused on where the dollars are coming from, and the dollars are just dollars. That's not boots on the ground necessarily. That's not the work. And at the Patterson Foundation, we talk a lot about building connective tissue and widespread participation. And this is a perfect example of where when you strengthen that connective tissue between parts, you really engage that widespread participation to be part of the solution to the problem, as opposed to alienating any one group and saying it's all about this group or that group. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the evolution of how that sort of came about and how we started to engage more public volunteers. So currently the Patterson Foundation and our Community Preparedness, Recovery, and Resiliency Initiative are turned toward strengthening the CERT teams. We know that being active in that space helps to encourage the widespread participation we were just speaking about, and we know that that's really vital to resilience. So as someone who's been in this world for quite a long time, describe some of the diverse roles of CERT team members. I know that they can do a lot of different things in blue sky moments and in the midst of a disaster. And how can people of all capabilities participate in being a CERT volunteer?
Well, the community emergency response teams actually came out of experiences California had during some earthquakes where they ran out of responders and citizens were stepping up and helping, everything from dragging hose to helping people that were trapped in their homes. And the politicians, it did not come from the responders. The politicians looked around and says, we need to better engage our public. And that's where the idea of providing training on tasks that public can perform in their communities. Because when these, like with our hurricanes, but with their earthquakes, it's very hard to move around. You basically are where you're at when it happens, and you're not going to be able to go very far. And you may not be able to get help in. So what could people in their own neighborhood do? And that was the idea behind teaching them very basic, the first aid, how to secure utilities, how to do very light rescues, how to use a fire extinguisher. And the training was really about helping neighborhood organizations, whether it's Crime Watch or just group people to come together, that if a disaster happened, whether it's a tornado or wildfire or a hurricane, whatever, the things we see in Florida, that they could be that initial response while the other responders were trying to get in. I mean, people remember, from Irma and other storms, it took a long time for some of the rescue teams to cut their way into areas to get to people, because there's so many trees down, power lines down, and so much debris in some of these areas. And the idea is the closest response is neighbor helping neighbor. So what if we train people, gave them some equipment, taught them how to interface when the responders show up so that they can tell them, here's the homes that are fine. Either they're snowbirds, they're not here, it's hurricane season, they're not there, we know they're not home, or we checked these homes, everybody there is okay. Here are the homes that we're not sure about or we can't get to, or there's a tree on the house and we can't get in there. So the responders are not having to search everything. They know where to go and where the greatest needs are. That was the idea. But the interesting thing that happens is some people, that's as far as they want to go. They'll take the training, they'll get their stuff, and then they're good. Other people want to engage more. And for emergency managers, I think sometimes some emergency managers are much more open-minded about this. Others, they see this as more work, and they tend to not want to engage in going, look, we just did the training for this. I don't have time. I don't have resources to continue, the things you want to do. But other counties and other local emergency managers are finding, hey, when you do all of these preparedness fairs and you don't have many staff, your CERT teams like to do that kind of stuff. Some of those folks are very good at talking about the preparedness message and not only promoting CERT teams, but just helping you talk about everything from mitigation to how to get ready for a storm. So that was the first thing. The other thing that some counties realized is it's not in their role as a CERT team member, but because they're interested, is providing staffing for especially some of the small county emergency operations center. Staffing from there, helping with a lot of things that the information hotlines that sometimes it's hard to staff. I mean, here in my county, I knew that volunteers were great at this as far back as the 80s because our crisis hotline is all staffed by volunteers. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're volunteers that come in, they get training. It's overseen by the county's social services, their crisis center mental health specialists. But that was always run by volunteers. And so the idea that you could train people up to help with the, just the overload of 211 calls that would be coming in counties trying to answer that 411, stuff like that. Others, because they want to be, it interests them and they want to join us. We refer to them to Red Cross and other organizations, become trained as shelter managers, work. A lot of times we go back to and go, a lot of the faith-based also have disaster components. It was always interesting to me that they didn't even know that their own church or synagogue had disaster relief programs. We're always looking for volunteers. And so that idea, sometimes becoming trained for a CERT actually is a catalyst where people want to serve more. They want to do different things. And I think the challenge for emergency managers is figuring out how to harness that in a productive way and not look at it, well, it's just more requests. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time. I have a very small staff. I'm like, well, that's even more. Because again, you forget. You think of them as, okay, these are CERT team members, they've taken the training, and you label them that way, and you forget there's doctors, there's engineers, there's construction crews, there's teachers. I mean, people come from so many diverse backgrounds. And again, in some of our communities, a lot of our CERT teams are actually retirees who've led brilliant professional careers and have a lot of skills far beyond that. Yeah. And it's what I call the disaster bug. People get it, they get infected, they're like, this is really fascinating to me. I want to serve. I want to help. And I think that's one of the things I try to encourage emergency managers is you need to work with these folks. You need to recognize that there's more there than just a CERT team. And yes, we know that the CERT teams, as they're designed, they're not deployable. They were really designed for a fixed base community or facility. But the people that took that training are looking for another way to serve. And I have yet to find any emergency management program that has excess staff and capability.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like with budgets and everything else, you're going to be seeing a lot more funding, especially as we see the federal government pulling back on some of this funding. Mm-hmm. So volunteers are really, I think, one of the resources that we got to do a better job of engaging. And look at the CERT team training as actually a gateway for these folks. Who, again, some people are going to take the CERT training, they're done, they're content. Others, they want to do more. I mean, a lot of times when you're trying to do your exercises, you don't have enough people out there to play injured folks or be part of the exercise and serving roles in that exercise. And I'm like, well, you've got all these people here interested, and they're going, well, they're just CERT team members. I'm like, no, they're members of your community. And again, I'm always amazed at some of the backstories of the CERT team members and some of the experiences and
and knowledge they could bring that emergency managers aren't failing to tap into.
I'm so glad you started to touch on this, because my next question was, I was curious, since you've been a player on both sides, so to speak, what those inherent tensions are between the government and the volunteer groups. And something that came up repeatedly at the CERT summit was that communication is a major issue. And like you said, each of the emergency managers feel a little bit differently about this, but across the board, it seems like just that ability to connect with each other and get messages across of what's needed from the government perspective, or messages across from CERT teams of what they're willing to do or willing to step up for is really a challenge. Are there any other things that you haven't mentioned that you think, those inherent tensions between the two?
Again, emergency managers are not necessarily what I call bad people, but if they ever had a bad experience with volunteer or a volunteer group, it tends to taint all of theirs. And the other thing about government is they always want control, and we don't really control volunteers, or they perceive they don't control volunteers. And again, there needs to be an understanding. And again, we're talking about now people have taken CERT training, but they're now fulfilling roles that are not that CERT team. And I think this is where there's a lot of myths out there. One of the things that, emergency managers sometimes will complain about, well, they're volunteers and, and I can't control them. I'm like, yeah, you can fire them. You can't fire a volunteer. I said, well, I've done it. Because in the state of Florida, what's interesting is, and this is true for counties and cities, they can treat those volunteers as non-paid government employees. And that's really key, because it brings them in under liability and workman's comp coverage in performing those duties. And so counties and cities have a lot of ability, one, to offer protection to people that are moving above that CERT level, and now they're acting at the direction of the city or county, and go, yeah, I can do background checks on you, I can fingerprint you, I can issue ID cards. Yeah, that takes time, but I also am offering you benefits of workman's comp. So if something happens, we're covered. You're protected under the liability of local governments as long as you're operating within those parameters. And if you are being disruptive, or you are not fitting the system, we can thank you for your service and terminate you. And I think that's one of the things that people don't get is, well, look, the CERT teams are volunteers, very much a local system that isn't really government-centric, government control. But once I move up and I start volunteering, like if I go to work with the Red Cross will fire you if you don't perform or obey the requirements. Most of the other organizations are the same way, that there's codes of conduct, there's ethics, there's also how effective you are. I mean, some people, they're just disagreeable all the time. They're just not a good fit. My response to a lot of people is like, people are always wanting to help. They're not always good at everything. Let's find where they're good at. I mean, some people aren't people, so don't put them out there as the face of your organization, but they may be really good at doing data analytics or doing data entry, or things that don't require them to face the public. I mean, sometimes the people that can fix your computers and do your IT, I wouldn't really want sitting at a booth, but they can do stuff that keeps things going. And so, but I try to get people to go, look, quit looking at them as a burden and see them as a force multiplier. And that for small investments, I can get big gains. And when they say, well, I've had bad experiences with volunteers, I don't control them. If they are working for you at your direction, they're now a non-paid government employee, and you can fire them.
Yeah.
It gets past this mentality that I don't control. And again, it's usually because there's been a bad experience. And again, there's great people out there, but everybody knows you get one person in the wrong place in the wrong position, and they can sour it for a lot of organizations.
Yeah. It sounds like, again, going back to like the communication place of, if your expectations are clear and you do a good job at looking at the volunteers you have at hand, be thoughtful about where you're placing them, and the machine can start to work for you. But if you're just avoiding it altogether because you're afraid of something going wrong, that's, we're missing a whole big helping hand that will strengthen the overall efforts.
Yeah, and again, this is a two-way street. I think sometimes the volunteer organizations or the volunteers themselves come in with all these demands, and that will also shut down
Yeah.
programs that don't have resources, don't have time, and go, I can't deal with this. And again, I find that this is a much better way to approach the emergency manager instead of coming in and going, we need to do training. You got to do this. You should be doing that. You got to be doing all this. Why aren't you doing this? It's like, what can we do to support you?
Yeah. Somebody asked a good question yesterday at the CERT summit it was a community conversation with an emergency manager there. And she said, essentially, can you help us understand the things that would be helpful for us to do? Because then we will figure out how to focus our efforts on strengthening those pieces of ourselves. And I think that was sort of the key question of that conversation was if you can identify those things, then the volunteers can work to be what you need them to be for the government.
Again, they're force multipliers. Again, I'm an amateur radio operator, and one of the key tenets of amateur radio and emergency services is we're not in charge. We work for the served agency. So if that's the county or city government, we work for them. We're not independent. We don't run separate operations. We're not in charge. Our job's providing communications. If we're working for the Red Cross, doing shelters, same deal. We work for the served agency. And I think that's one of the things that when volunteers move up, especially as they're bringing their organization into, government other, is you're working for the served agency. And that relationship of just asking, where are things that you can, because sometimes the emergency managers won't even realize what the volunteers can do. And you start saying, well, what are the things you need? Just like that question. They may start identifying stuff and not really think there's a capability there and forget you got retired CEOs of corporations. They've run bigger operations and more complexity than you realize. And again, I think it's just this tendency to one, bad experiences, going in there and there's all these demands. They want more and more. I don't have enough resources. I don't control them. And I was like, sit down and ask questions. What can you do for me? And then go, what can we do for you? And I think a lot of times, if you'll start having those conversations, and again, emergency managers they're strapped for time. Budgets are brutal, trying to keep up with all the demand for paperwork. But just having that conversation, what does it take? 30 minutes and a cup of coffee.
What would you say to people who are, brand new to this idea of CERT, never heard of it before, but someone that you would want to encourage, like, hey, this is worth your time to go get this training, to get involved? What would you say to them to help encourage them to do that?
Well, with this, you will use Florida's hurricane history. Areas have been so heavily hit that it took hours to days for the first responders, the fire trucks, the ambulances to even get in areas. And most people in those situations are going to try to help, and they're going to, because our fastest response always neighbors helping neighbors. But a lot of people go, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure. Getting the CERT training gives you training. It helps you understand what you can do. It empowers you. And, I tell people this, I said, whether you think about it or not, it's natural disaster to try to help your neighbors. People you don't even know their names live across the street for you for 5 years. In a disaster, that may be the closest response. And so that, going from, it's probably going to happen anyway. And if you are cut off, there's no help coming from the outside. Wouldn't it make sense to get enough training where you can do more than just go check on each other? You can stop bleeding. You can put out a small fire. You can help get people out of their homes if a tree came down on them. And more importantly, when those responders get there, you can tell them where the greatest needs are. So they're not having to go to every house where you already know there's nobody there. They're okay. We've checked on them, but here's the folks we really need to get to. The trees on them. They can't get out. We're talking to them, but they sound, this is where you need to go to work.
Yeah. I love that idea because most people's instinct is to help after a storm. I know mine is. My husband and I are usually the ones in the street with our older neighbors, like helping get trees out of the way, or we've done it after every storm, but to have the training so that you can do it safely to keep yourself safe. The idea of being able to help communicate with first responders so time isn't wasted, because time is, really precious in those hours after disaster. So this is one of my favorite questions to kind of ask for all kinds of things. But if you had a magic wand in the CERT world, where would you wave it? What would you use that magic wand for? What problem would you solve with it?
I'd probably be thinking about, and again, this is going to cause a lot of controversy across a lot of the government. I'd look at CERT too. I think that there is an ability to give people even more training. When you look at the CERT training we do, it's very basic. It's very much survivalist. And I think there's more we could do there. There's a lot of things that, when you're dealing with disasters, that I think would be, additional skills we could add. One of the things that, we encourage is people to develop more communication skills. There's a lot of tools out there in addition to amateur radio that people can get and improve communication. Because again, this is one of the things I said yesterday, but it's very true. In a lot of disasters, the only thing is as far as you can walk and as far as you can see. And there may be help 3 blocks over and you never knew it was there. But I would also think about this is a gateway of creating new volunteers. And maybe in that CERT 2 program is helping people find a path if they want to do more and they want to continue to serve. What are the things out there? I mean, FEMA runs a lot of training that's online that people can take and get more knowledge. Things like, what is the incident command system? Or how does the government response actually work? I mean, a lot of people think, well, it's always going to be, the president declares a disaster, FEMA's in charge. I'm like, no, it's local government's in charge, states supporting them, FEMA supporting the governors. And, I always, even members of Congress that should know better, they really don't understand that a lot of our disaster response is based upon our Constitution, which says all things not, don't, in the Constitution, anything that's not reserved for the federal government belongs to the states and the people. And that's why disasters are not run by the White House. They're run by governors and local governments.
Interesting. I really value the idea of continuing the training, letting it get a little bit deeper, a little bit stronger, because there's just so much room to keep strengthening that overall. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Waffle House Index. We're going to put the image up on the screen for anyone that's watching the podcast, but as a native Floridian, I've heard about the Waffle House always, but I met a lot of people yesterday at the summit who were like, what is this Waffle House Index thing? So I want you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, it really came out of Hurricane Charlie. One of the changes I was trying to make at the state was we had traditionally gone with a formula that says locals are hit first, they assess, they relay what they need to the state. We'll determine whether or not that makes sense, and then we'll send it. And that delay of it's got to exceed your capabilities. We got to do assessments. A lot of times the state would send people down to do the assessments before we would send anybody. It could take up to 3 days. I thought this was ludicrous. And I started going, why don't we just respond like we're bad, like it's bad? We know a hurricane just hit. We have a fairly good idea because we know the population about what we're going to need. Why don't we just go like it's bad? And people are saying, well, you don't know that. It could be too much. People are saying you're not waiting. That isn't the process. And I got pushed back, but I said, we're doing it. So in Hurricane Charlie, we were there and I'd flown down with Governor Bush. The storm had hit Friday. I was down there first thing Saturday morning. And my observation was it was bad. And Tallahassee's a long ways away. But I had a really good team in Tallahassee. I had a great chief of the response, Mike DiLorenzo. And I was very comfortable with, I don't need to be in the state EOC. I need to be in the field. So I stayed in Charlotte County, and it was a lot, stuff would come up and the state EOCs were like asking all these questions. I'm on the ground. I can answer those questions quickly and go, no, this is what we're doing. This is what we need to do. So the problem was many people think Charlotte was the only county that got hit. Well, go ask DeSoto and Hardy County about that. Man, they got clobbered. And I like to remind people, Charlie was like a 10-mile wide tornado. I mean, it did billions of dollars of damage, and all the way into Orlando, where it tore up the airport and was taking the second and third floors off of hotels on Sand Lake Road. I mean, this was a powerful hurricane, all the way to an exit just outside of Daytona Beach up in Volusia County. So we had multiple counties in different states, even as far north as Sarasota and as far south as Collier County. There were power outages. And we were getting all these numbers in, and the sit reps were so thick, and it was really hard to break through that. And again, a lot of counties weren't even aware of how bad it was in some parts of the state. And so I said, guys, these situation reports we're putting in, here's how many power outages out in Hardy, and here's how many's out in DeSoto, and here's how many's out in Sarasota. So I said, these numbers don't really tell me what the impacts are. I said, let's go to a very simple concept of red, yellow, and green. Red's bad, yellow's and green, they can manage it. Doesn't mean there's not damages. And I said, we started doing things like the emergency operation centers that fully staffed and running, then they're red. If they are partially activated, they're yellow. If they've been able to shut down their emergency operation center, they're green. We did schools, which Governor Bush really focused on. If the schools are closed, it's red. If there's partial activations and some schools are still not open, it's yellow. If we're back in regular session, it's green. Doesn't mean the buildings weren't damaged, but the kids are back in school. So we started, and it really was good because you put up these maps of all the Florida counties, and you would show for search and rescue who was still red, who was yellow, who was green, water, power. We did it as a percentage of outages, so it wasn't just a number. And it really started helping people realize that the counties that had the most red were basically Charlotte, DeSoto, and Hardy County. And then other counties had various levels. And so, okay, that's how we got red, yellow, and green. The next part of that was we were down there, and some of the staff had come down from the state EOC to join me down there on Sunday. And at that point, Major Tad Warfel, the Florida National Guard, was assigned to us by the National Guard. So he worked with my team, and he was part of my team. And he came down, and Ben Nelson, our state meteorologist, had come down. So our days would start before sunrise, and we get in late. We had found a place to stay down near Naples, and down near Fort Myers. We weren't that far south, and a lot of those areas still had power outages. Trees were down, stuff like that. We get up in the morning, and we figured if we didn't get breakfast, that may be the only meal because there was no certainty. Our days were just chaotic, going all over the place. So we got up. And we come out to the interstate and nothing's open. So we drive south. And the first thing we see at the next interchange, the only thing that's lit up was a Waffle House. So we pulled in, walked in, woman handed us a piece of paper, not the usual plastic menu with all the stuff on it, just a piece of paper. Said, the freezer went out, the refrigeration went out. We threw all that out. So we have a limited menu. And we looked at it and said, fine. Coffee and breakfast. We're good. The next day we get up, and this is Monday, this is Tuesday. We get up, and as we're pulling out to head south to that Waffle House, it turns out the Waffle House at that interchange was now open. So we go in, same deal, piece of paper. We looked over at the guy cooking and said, weren't you down at the store? He said, yeah, I'm over from the East Coast. I'm helping them open the stores as they come up. And we go outside. This guy on the back of his bumper had this thing called WORT, Waffle House Emergency Response Team. And it was like they were getting their stores open and everything. And I had known for some time that if there was anything open in a disaster zone, it was going to be a Waffle House. They rarely closed, and they were one of the first things open. So that next day, I go get my briefing. And it's got all my slides in it, color-coded, so I can do a quick, here's what's going on. And I get to the Waffle House slide. And Tad and Ben had created a Waffle House slide. And basically, if the Waffle House is red and closed, bad. If they're open with a limited menu, they're yellow. And if they're up and have a full menu, they're green. That would have probably been the end of it. It was just an inside thing. Except, remember where I said at the very beginning of this long tail that we weren't waiting anymore? We wanted to go. And one of the problems you have with hurricanes is you can have damages 100 miles from where it makes landfall. So how do you know you're in an area hard hit when you're seeing all this damage? Well, if you run up and down Florida's interstate systems, there's very few places that you won't come across Waffle Houses. And so as our teams, and I told them, I said, we're not waiting for the sun to shine. We're not waiting for it to stop raining. We won't go out when it's still dangerous, but as soon as we can, we're going. And we're going to drive to where it made landfall. And people would say, how do we know we're there yet? And that's when the Waffle House kicked in. If the Waffle House is open, keep going. If it's open but got a limited menu, we probably got a lot of people needs. Power outages, people don't have wells, their food's going bad, stores may not be open. So that's mass care. But that's not search and rescue area. But if you get there and the store's been closed by the storm, damage is so bad they can't get open or they're not open, go to work, because you're now entering in the hard hit area. And it was a rough rule, thumb that we were using, but it just kept going. And we were doing briefings, and I'd throw that in there more as here's something kind of humorous.
Levity.
But over time, it just took on, and it was, what was really fascinating to me was it was never a formal process. It was never this precise measurement, but it told us a lot about communities at a glance. And I told people it's like a vital sign. It's like taking a pulse. If you don't have a pulse, I know you got a problem. If you got a rapid pulse or something, I know there's an underlying condition. And if you've got a good, strong, steady pulse, it doesn't mean you're not injured, but you're not immediately going to need attention. So there was this idea that if you think about it, they rarely close. They get open very quickly. They can operate without power. They have a lot of different procedures and things they do to get open quickly and safely. And it means that, one, they can get the store still standing. Their staff can get there. And their staff, they have a very simple operational plan that says show up. They can get enough minimal going. If they can get the flat top going and they can get supplies in, they can open. And their customers can get there. And so it starts telling you about, well, one, there's enough roads open that they can get in. Two, they can get supplies in. And it starts telling you a little bit about the community overall situation. And it followed me to FEMA. One of the funniest things, a lot of people wrote that it was invented during Joplin because it got wrote about when a tornado hit there, an F5, one of the strongest tornadoes. And the story was, it was actually, again, one of these observations. We'd gotten there early. I've been there all day. I'm dragging. I still got calls to do that night with leadership from the White House and Homeland Security. We're finished with our last meeting, and we're heading back to where our motel was. We're driving past, in this case, it was a Starbucks. There's cars all around. I said, pull in, I need a coffee. We pull in, get there, go to the door, go to open the door, and they go, the door says closed. They're in their boiled water order. I'm like, oh, crap. But why are all the cars still in the parking lot? One of my guys said, because they left their Wi-Fi open. So people who, they were literally going to walk to Starbucks to get to the Wi-Fi because there was so much devastation and communication so disrupted that they were able to get there. So we get back in car drive, only a couple more blocks. So this is still in the same area. We get there and there's a Waffle House there. I'm like, pull in, I can get coffee there. I said, well, they're in their boiled water order. I said, watch this. We go in there and sure enough, there was somebody, basically looks like somebody's grandmother, pouring water into the top of their coffee makers. And they had hot coffee, they had food, no ice, everything was on plastic. But they were working through the boiled water because their coffee makers aren't plumbed to the plumbing. So they were able to bring in, potable water, make the coffee. You could get canned drinks, you couldn't get ice drinks, and they were cooking. So it was just, these are like within 3 blocks of each other. The difference between closed and open.
What incredible resourcefulness the Waffle House has set up for themselves. And so I guess the key takeaway is if the Waffle House is closed, it's really bad.
Yeah, now there's all kinds of these people making, and some of them are rather humorous, but they're basically going, what are the level of hurricanes? And the Waffle House is open, screens, it's not that bad. They get to, whenever you get to the Waffle House is closing before the hurricane gets there, leave. It's like the ultimate sign that if Waffle House is taking this seriously, time to leave was a long time ago.
Yeah, get out of Dodge. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared today. You've got so many nuggets of wisdom, and I know everyone that's listening will feel really appreciative to hear everything that you've shared. Is there anything else that you feel like we haven't covered that you want to make sure our listeners know about or are familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about CERT teams as being very much your neighborhood, but remember that training you have is goes with you wherever you're at. And one of the things that unfortunately we see too often is in accidents and active shooters are people who suffer serious injuries and are bleeding. And being able to stop bleeding can save a life. So remember that first aid training you're taking or have taken as part of a CERT team isn't just about when disaster happens to your neighborhood. It could be anywhere you're at. And again, the fastest response in a lot of these situations are bystanders.
I'm really glad that you shared that. I do think it's not in everyone's purview that when we're talking about this disaster training, it's really about emergency response. It's not about hurricanes, like you said, only. It covers all of these other things that we can experience in life, and having those skills can just give us a more prepared community to respond to all the different things that can happen. So thank you for sharing that last piece. That's really helpful, I think. Again, it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast and to have you as a keynote speaker at the CERT Summit. We're so grateful for your time with us, and I look forward to talking to you again soon, I hope. Listeners, to learn more and stay tuned, please visit thepattersonfoundation.org.